Good morning, everyone. As promised, today's video is all about Surround, what it is, what it does, how I use it in my own garden, and some pros and cons. In my quest to find organic products that can assist me in my garden in my fight against pests and diseases, Surround has overall been incredibly helpful. So first, what exactly is Surround? It is an OMRI-listed crop protectant formulated from kaolin clay. The kaolin clay powder is mixed with water and applied via a sprayer to plant surfaces. As it dries, it forms a film barrier which protects plants from sun scald and heat stress and deters insect feeding and egg laying via irritation and confusion. Now, I've had a lot of folks ask me if they can just use regular old kaolin clay, the kind that's often sold for like facial masks and beauty products, interchangeably with Surround. It's a legitimate question because that type of kaolin clay is typically much easier to find and often less expensive. Unfortunately, the answer is no. Surround goes through a special process which allows it to create that film barrier on plant surfaces. It's also filtered to a smaller particle size than your typical kaolin clay. So what does Surround do? What is it actually good for? I touched on a couple of things, but its benefits also include improved plant health, vigor, and yield. It reduces canopy temperatures, thereby reducing heat and water stress, cooling plants by up to 10 to 15 degrees. It can also protect plants from sunburn and sun scald, and improves overall plant health in hotter growing conditions. It's kind of like a sunscreen for plants, with the added benefit of protecting from some pests and diseases. Surround is labeled for a wide range of fruit, vegetable, grain, and ornamental plants, and for many of the pests and some of the diseases that plague those plants. Now, in the video description below, I will link to the actual label for Surround so that if you're interested in reading all of the potential applications, you can do so. But just a few of the more common pests and diseases that Surround can help deter include apple maggot, asparagus beetles, armyworms, bean beetles, thrips, and powdery mildew. Surround is often a choice in organic orchards because it works so well for deterring many fruit tree pests. But my main reason for using it is to deter cucumber beetles from my cucurbit crops, flea beetles from my eggplants, and at times, Japanese beetles from my grapes. And while Surround isn't labeled for squash bugs or squash vine borers, I've found that it's helped me in my fight against those insect pests as well. My tactic is to plant a sacrificial or trap crop of sorts that I don't spray with Surround. I've found that the pests tend to gravitate towards those plants versus the ones that I've coated with Surround. And really the same could be said for any type of pest that you're trying to use Surround to deter. Now, I've even read testimonials from people saying that spraying their hazelnut trees with Surround helped to keep squirrels from stealing their nuts. Now, Surround's not labeled for squirrels either, but it worked for those folks. Now, full disclosure, I use a variety of tactics to help slow down pests like cucumber beetles and squash bugs on my crops. I'll typically keep my young plants netted with insect netting until they start to bloom. When I take those nets off, I start covering the plants with Surround. I also planted extra late this year in hopes of avoiding the biggest onslaught of pests, in particular cucumber beetles. But I will say in the years that I'm diligent about really keeping my plants protected with Surround, I tend to have much better results. Now, I've not really focused on the cooling benefit that Surround can offer. I've primarily used it as a pest deterrent up until this point. But I can tell you, if we have another spring like we did this year, you can bet I will be trying out Surround on some of my brassicas to help cool those plants down when we get that heat wave in early spring. Next up, how do I use Surround? How is it actually applied to my plants? So I will start by saying that an agitating sprayer is ideal for applying Surround. I don't have one. I just use this regular old handheld sprayer. This is just a 2-gallon Chapin sprayer from Amazon. The key is mixing the Surround powder into the water thoroughly. The best way to do this is to fill the sprayer tank 1/4 to 1/2 full, add the Surround powder, let it sink into the water, and then close your lid and shake the sprayer vigorously for at least 30 seconds. Then we'll want to open it back up, add the remaining water, close, and then shake the sprayer again for at least 30 seconds. It's also a good idea to shake the sprayer every so often while doing the spraying as well. The application rate is 1/4 to 1/2 pound of Surround, which is equal to 1.5 to 3 cups of Surround to each gallon of water. I generally just figure on 2 cups per gallon. I'm using a milk jug cut in half as a funnel because it's much easier to get the powder into my sprayer this way. You'll want a sprayer which can deliver a fine mist, and the Surround water mixture should be applied to near drip, which just means you spray till it's not quite dripping off the foliage. I like to do a light coat and then come back over with a second light coat to ensure good coverage. Because the Surround coating doesn't appear to be totally white until it dries, sometimes it can be tempting to overspray. I find it easiest to spray in the morning right after the dew has dried. Then the spray dries quite quickly and I can fix any spots I've missed. Consistent coverage is key with Surround, so it needs to be reapplied when dry foliage has lost its white appearance. I generally find that this is about once a week in my area, unless I get a heavy rain. Keep in mind that dew will temporarily re-wet the coating, and if you come out first thing in the morning, it will look as if your Surround has washed off. But as it dries, it will become white again. A Surround can be applied up to the day of harvest. The white residue which is present can easily be wiped off produce. And when using Surround, cleanup is really important. The key to keeping sprayers from getting clogged up is to clean out that sprayer as soon as you're finished. I spray the tank till it's empty, then rinse it well with clean water. Then I fill the sprayer back up about 1/4 to 1/3 full of clean water and let it run all the way out to flush any residue that's in the nozzle. Then I let my tank air dry. And lastly, what are the pros and cons of Surround? Now, some of the pros I've already mentioned, but I'm going to go into just a little bit more detail on some of these. First, it protects plants from sunburn, and it can actually reduce sunburn-related losses by up to 50%. And next, it can actually improve photosynthesis. I had a really great question on an earlier video where I mentioned Surround, and the viewer wanted to know if this film could interfere with photosynthesis in any way. That's a very logical question. My initial answer was that I had never seen any detrimental effects in all my years of using this product. But when I dug a little bit deeper into this product, I found some interesting information. Surround can actually lead to more efficient photosynthesis and higher yields in high heat, intense light growing areas, as would be the case in many growing areas in the height of summer. Surround can also help prevent fungal spores, such in the case of powdery mildew, from propagating and establishing themselves on the surfaces of plants. It deters insect feeding and egg-laying patterns in certain pests via modes of irritation and confusion. Basically, insects find the texture so annoying and unlike what they are used to that they just go elsewhere to feed or lay eggs. With some pests, it can also impede grasping and restrict movement, as well as acting as host camouflage, making a host plant virtually unrecognizable to a potential pest. But the nice thing is, unlike some other organic pest treatments, Surround does not interfere with pollinators, beneficial insects, or earthworms. And as I mentioned earlier, Surround can also help keep plants cooler. It can cool plants by up to 10 to 15 degrees, effectively increasing plant vigor and improving yields in hotter growing areas. Now, of course, on the flip side, we have some cons too. And interestingly enough, the last pro that I mentioned can also be a con depending on your growing area. And that is that effect of cooling down plants. So what researchers have found is that in cool growing areas and in low light situations, the application of Surround can actually delay maturity by 3 to 7 days, particularly in pome and stone fruit. So things like apples, cherries, plums, apricots, that type of thing. Now for a home grower, this is probably not an issue, but if you're growing for market with an expected maturity date, this could pose some potential issues. Now, another con is that many pests are suppressed, but not completely controlled by Surround, which means that in high pressure situations, you will often have to resort to a second or third mode of control. So an example is in the case of my squash bugs. Surround doesn't always do enough to stop them from destroying my plants in very, very high pressure years. So I often find that it helps deter them and slow them down, but sometimes by the end of the season, I'm also resorting to things like hand picking the eggs off the undersides of leaves, squishing the larvae, sometimes even using a control like neem oil. Now, another con, and this is the big one for me, is that in order for Surround to be truly effective, thorough, consistent coverage is an absolute must. If that coverage is not maintained at all times, any little window can give pests the edge in. This is particularly tricky for me during July and August when I need the protection the most because we tend to have a lot of random pop-up showers, often ones that aren't even forecasted. So I can spend an hour out here applying my Surround, get a pop-up washout thunderstorm, and I'm back to square one. I have to reapply everything I just did. Pop-up thunderstorms aside, generally I figure I can get about a week of wear out of each application of Surround, sometimes up to 14 days, but more often a week. The other thing that can be tricky is this time of year, plants are putting on a lot of growth. So I'll have times when I apply, and then as soon as 3 or 4 days later, I've got 6 inches of new growth that is unprotected. The other issue with this time of year, when plants are huge, especially the cucurbits, as they tend to vine and sprawl all over the place, it can be very difficult to get in and get full coverage on all plant surfaces. So I try to coat the tops and the bottoms, but with some of these plants, they're so dense, I really can't get in there and cover everything. So for that reason, some years I just use Surround in the beginning when the plants are small, and then later in the season, I'll resort to other options. Sometimes, honestly, that option is just letting plants have their way, and if they survive, they survive. Another con is that Surround can be difficult to remove from certain surfaces. So I don't recommend spraying anywhere near wood or asphalt or concrete or brick, anything that you don't want this residue sticking to. That's not an issue out here for me in my garden, but if you had something up close to, say, a brick wall on your house, it might not be the best option. And then finally, the big con that I hear probably the most from folks is the expense and the packaging size. So anymore, it is hard to find Surround in a package smaller than 25 pounds. And as you can imagine, shipping that 25-pound bag isn't always cheap. I've not been able to find Surround locally around me anywhere, so I do end up ordering it online. One of the best deals that I found this year was from Seven Springs Farm Supply. Now, 25 pounds may be a lot more than your typical home gardener can use in a season, but properly stored, the Surround powder can last quite a few years. Now, just as a frame of reference to treat all of my cucurbit crops, my eggplants, and my grapes here in just my home garden, this time of year when the plants are full size, I end up using about 8 cups. So that's filling that sprayer up 2 times. Now, if I did all the plants at my parents' as well, I would be doubling that amount. So I could probably pretty easily go through a 25-pound bag in one growing season. Those of you with smaller growing areas, definitely keep that bag and reuse it season after season. Or find a friend who needs some and split that cost. Now, one last little nugget for those of you who love to dive a little deeper on all the facts about these types of products. I'm going to include a link in the video description below to the actual manufacturer's site for Surround. It's really interesting. They have a lot of studies linked there that you can review. I've gotten ideas for different usages in my garden just from perusing those articles. So if you like that extra information, definitely go and check that out. So hopefully I've answered all of your questions about Surround. But if I've missed any, definitely drop a line in the comments below and let me know. And if you found today's video helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.